Dino says this: with Alexander Isak and Johan Wissa both downing tools and going on strike for their clubs, as well as other recent examples of players forcing their way out despite having time left on their contract, has player power now gone too far in football? Vish, it's not the first time we've seen this. We've seen this before in the past. Is it just something that happens, or is it going too far?
I don't know. It's going too far. We probably know more about what's going on behind the scenes now because of the various different avenues of information, and also just how player parties, players' representatives are able to brief in accordance to club briefings and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. It is quite interesting that in this particular example that there feels to be a domino effect of the people doing it for different reasons. In an ideal world, Isak gets his move to Liverpool, which then opens up Visa's move to Newcastle. Yep. And it's funny that in that chain, almost like if you think of it like a house sale and purchase, there are two people kicking off because the other is not being allowed to move. Essentially, Wissa should be protesting on behalf of Isak.
Yep. Do you think that's the next step?
I think that is the next step, yeah.
Agents teaming up.
I don't think it's going to... Or rather, I don't think it's gone too far, but it is all a nonsense, yes.
Mm-hmm. I think also player power going too far is a conversational topic that older people have said about the generation below them footballers.
Since the days of Jimmy Hill, you might argue.
Yeah.
Because he was getting players bigger wage decades ago.
Quite. And then you have other things that come into play, like the Bosman ruling and stuff like that, which gave players a lot more power. But the thing that leapt to my mind when I saw this question, so showing my age, but also showing an indicative way of showing how long it's been going on for, is I remember the saga of Roy Keane's Man United contract in, what was it, around the Christmas of 1999, where he has said, if you don't satisfy my demands, I'm going to go to Serie A, right? And he'd been linked to a couple of Serie A clubs. Back then, Serie A clubs could pay a lot of money. Yeah. He had been offered a big amount of money at the time to go play there. And then United eventually kind of crumbled and offered him, I think, $50,000 a week, right? Yeah, and it was $40,000 a week basic and then $10,000 a week bonuses.
It broke their wage structure.
It did break their wage structure. And the football media world, which of course was very different than it is now, there wasn't so much kind of everyday people having their say, but the people who were in control of sports media then essentially collectively lost their minds about how a player could hold such a big club to ransom, how he's being paid so much money, an extortionate amount of money. Can you believe how many nurses would be paid with this amount of money? There was also a factor in his deal that he would get a testimonial 5 years hence, which would have meant that he'd have earned another couple of million quid or something. People were just going crazy. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, and Roy Keane was a fabulous player, and the money kind of pales into insignificance now looking at today's fees. But it does show you at least that this is a conversation that's been happening for a very, very long time. Yes. And we have to be careful of particularly people of our age, we're a bit older, and the players are all younger than us now. We have to be careful of falling into that trap of saying, back in the day, it would never have happened. The club was... It's kind of always been going on in a different way. That Roy Keane that's almost 26 years ago, and I remember it vividly. So I don't think, given the question, I don't think the player power has quote unquote gone too far. I just think that since things like the Bosman, where they have a little bit more leeway, that kind of revolutionised player trading, didn't it? There's been more options for players, and they know their worth. But I think people are just generally more aware these days. If you're an Isak or a Visa, to use the two players that Dino's named there, they know the career is going to be short. They know they going to be remembered for what they win. And I think in this case, at least, or these two cases at least, it is that players are moving because they think it gives them a better chance of actually winning things. It's not that they're not forcing their way out so they can go to Saudi or they can be proper, undiluted mercenaries. There are kind of football reasons why they're happening.
Yeah, playing the Champions League, whatever.
Yeah, playing the Champions League. Is it ideal that they're not playing at the moment? I don't think it is. I think that's a bad look. I would not support that. I think you should still play. I don't think there's any reason why you can't play beyond the fact that you're worried that you're going to get injured, but then players kind of see that as part and parcel of the game now anyway. Because chiefly, it kind of impedes your new move because you're not going to be match fit. So you're actually doing yourself a disservice and your new club a disservice for not playing.
I agree with that. Yeah.
So that isn't ideal. But other than that, I wouldn't take it personally. But then they're not leaving my club, are they? So.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that this is something that will always be the case, as you say. I don't think we'll get to a point where these kind of stories of players downing tools and whatnot will go away. I think the thought of every player, I'm just going to stick to my contract, and if I want to move and you don't want to sell me, fine, I'll just run down my contract and so on. And it's all uniformed and across the board.
Never going to happen.
It's a bit like saying we want consistency from defenders holding strikers in the box at penalties.
Yeah.
It's a case-by-case basis. Yes, there are certain parameters, and I think it's a great shame for the details that you've just given there, Luke, when a player says, I'm not going to play. And I don't think it serves anybody. But it's been happening a long time. And there are so many moving parts in this because... Well, did the club make promises? Are the club mistreating the player?
Yeah, we don't know.
What do you then revert to? Do you then revert to the clubs having all the power? Well, there was a reason why players kind of revolted against that many decades ago and wanted more wages and wanted a bit more freedom. There's a reason why the Bosman rule came in and was named after the player, because it seemed quite unfair. And you accept that. So I think the idea when you think, well, the fans are the ones, of course, who suffer for this because they don't see particular players. Newcastle fans, in this case with Isak, a player who's lit up that stadium so many times, scored a winning goal in the cup final, and they love him. They're the ones who suffer. But are the club treating the player well? Some people say we've treated him marvellously well, and that may well be the case for some. It's a boring answer, but that may well be the case for that. The player might be just kicking off. There's so many ins and outs. I just think it's such a shame, though, with Isak that him behaving like this completely ruins his reputation at Newcastle when he's done.
Yeah, it does. It does.
And that's from a fan point of view. That's from looking at it from a sort of romantic sort of.
But we're talking about top level competitive sport, right?
Yes.
And it works the other way.
Yeah.
Was Aaron Ramsdale thanked?
Yeah.
When they brought in David Raya 6 months later or whatever it was.
Exactly.
But what happened was the club got an opportunity to do what they thought improved upon what they've already got, and Newcastle and Brentford would do exactly the same. If Johan Visser was very happy at Brentford, wasn't angling for a move, hadn't heard that someone else wanted him, and Brentford had the opportunity before the end of the window to get a player that was better than him, they would do it.
Well, they were offered,
and that's how competitive sport works. And the problem is that it's not a problem, but one of the factors here is that, of course, you're right to mention briefly that the fans, the fans, like it or not, start to take it personally because they think that, with Alex Isak, what he's had to put up with, for want of a better phrase, is this lineage, is this idea that Alan Shearer will come out and say, it's a privilege to be number 9 for Newcastle.
Yes.
He'll then quote Jackie Milburn, who says, I put that shirt on for all the people down the mines every week who couldn't represent them because I did it for them. And he should know that kind of thing. And you have to understand that, one, everyone's different, and two, the game, that's a way that the game has moved on.
But this is the tricky thing, Luke. This is why we're trying to jam this almost unquantifiable, unscientific thing into a box, and we're trying to say, right, this is what it is, this is what it looks like. You can't do, because
we don't need to do that, though.
Well, but I think that's what people want us to do.
What do you mean, Vish?
We don't need to try and essentially pour our nostalgia into a case and preserve it for generations.
No, but you indeed, and that's why when Shearer says what he may well have said, and the chat of Jackie Milburn and so on, is that relevant? But however, it is relevant to some people, and some people go, well, it is we've sung your name and all this kind of stuff, which is why it's the emotive side of it that gets poured into what is ultimately a business. And as you say, if Isak thinks, I can go and play for that team over there who have just won the league, they're among the favourites potentially for the Champions League and all the rest of it, I want to further my career and earn a lot more money as well. That is the harsh reality. And I think as football fans, we just can't and maybe even shouldn't accept that, because then a lot of the romance and a lot of the feeling is potentially taken out of the game. If you're a fan of a club like me in Fulham, you have to accept it because you know you're not the top dog and you're never going to be the top dog. And when a player goes, do you know what, I'm going to go to Saudi Arabia for a king's ransom because it's going to do whatever, or I'm happily going to go to Liverpool or even Spurs or something, you kind of go, yeah, that's annoying, but it happens. Can
I bring into the mix up? Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah.
Can I bring into the mix up? Perhaps a different perspective might be interesting to think about is the Eberechi Eze to Arsenal thing.
Yeah, very different.
Eberechi Eze has gone from a great club to a bigger club. He's done it the right way. He kept quiet. He didn't not play. And if you look at the post on Instagram that Eze did, I think a collaboration post with Crystal Palace, the outpouring on there was universally positive.
But very different because Palace were willing to sell. And the club knew that. All the fans knew that. They were in a position where selling was very important. I mean, Paris said that.
There is room for compromise in all of these deals.
Yes.
There's a room, if people are willing to compromise, and we have talked about this in a slightly different way recently on the show, the way to compromise, it may not be palatable for how Alexander Isak's feeling at the moment because he's headstrong or he's got his head turned and he's mentally somewhere else or whatever. But that's all because that's of what's happened. It's been done before where players can go and say, all right, I'll play for you for 3 months. But in January, I'm going. And that's the deal we do. And you know what? Newcastle might want him to stay to the summer. And Alex under Isak might want to go now. So the compromise is you go in January and you give us 3 months of your best, you get up to speed, you score as many goals as you can, and in January we'll let you go.
But he would argue that these kind of...
Well, we don't... But that, the problem... Marcus, there's no point saying that because you start getting into territory where you just don't know what's happening.
But the reason why I do say it is because the point I made a few moments ago is that every case is different. So comparing Eze to Isak is very different in that way, which is why I've used the one of Paulinho when Joao Paulinho was playing for Fulham. He goes to Munich, he's holding up the shirt and then comes back and says, sorry, we didn't find a replacement for you. Back into training, pal. And he does it and he gets his move. Okay, on loan at Spurs now. But
the question's about player power. Players know the power they've got now and they're willing to use it in certain circumstances when it suits them. And I understand why fans get upset about it, but it's almost a bit like being annoyed that the tide comes in and goes out every day.
So to nail my colours to the mast, what I would say is that there are specific examples where I may not go for this, but generally speaking, I would say with Isak, I said it a few weeks ago, he has completely ostracised himself, and I don't think that's very wise for anybody to do in such a way. I understand he's trying to force a move through. I think it's a great shame, but he signed a contract with Newcastle. Whatever chat they've had, you can chat away to anybody. You've signed a contract. The fans really want you there. You've got to go back to work. You've got to go and play. You might try a load of things to get a move. At some point you go, that hasn't worked. Okay, fine. Tail between your legs. Back you go. And then get down and get on with it because it does not serve you. It doesn't serve anybody that you're not playing football. And that's what I would say. I think it's such a great shame when that sort of thing happens. But that's my feeling, though, to kind of go back and forth on this and say, well, every individual, it's so many moving parts, as I say. But with regard to players saying, no, I'm not training, I'm not playing, sod off, see you later, I ultimately would come down on the side of probably what is the club and the fans and say, come on. Honour your contract and do that. I understand you may want to move, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, and I suppose this is the most in-your-face example of how disposable a legacy is to a player and how much more it means to us, the fan, than it does for them, which we've always known, but this is quite an overt example of that.
It's brutal.
It is.
But it is life.
Life, my friends.
Life, my friends.
Yeah. All right, coming up after this, more of your questions.
Okay, we've got another question here from our friend Krish, who's got in touch with us via Instagram, one of the many options. Marcus
one of my favourite
options. At the top of the show.
My top 5 favourite options.
There you go. He says, after Max Dowman and Rio Ungamoa got all the headlines this week, why do you think players are bursting onto the scene so young nowadays? When I started watching football 30 years ago, it seemed inconceivable that a 15-year-old would be playing for one of the best clubs in the league. So my question is football getting younger? Now, before I throw it up to you guys, a bit of context. Premier League clubs are now signing more young players than ever. The average age of signings dipped below 23 for the first time in Premier League history last season. The 3 youngest players in Premier League history have made their debuts this year. But of the 10 youngest Premier League starting 11s, there's actually only 2 in recent years. Man United in this year and Chelsea in 2023. So a little bit of data there to give you a bit of context. Vish, is football getting younger? Or are we just getting older?
No, I think it is getting younger. I think the way kids are coached in particular has changed. I think the way kids are profiled has changed as well. There's a lot more a lot more research has been done on, for example, people being selected because of where they were born in a school year, and
interesting, broadening
for example, say that the school year right now to include those at the back end of the previous school year. So you end up. So it basically used to be the case that coming through at a young age, the more talented athletes in a school year would often be autumn-born kids, because of how the school year works over here in the UK with the August to June, July term time.
Or in England.
Term, yeah?
Definitely in
Oh,
Scotland.
England. Okay, all right, there you go. And also, I think the game has changed tactically. It's less of a contact sport, and if you think of the main, I suppose the main edge to development when it comes to professional sports is physicality. Probably have a bit less of that in football. Again, I'm just kind of positing that particular thing in terms of physicality, but I do feel like tactically, players are not as it's not as jostly as it once was, I suppose. Football, full stop.
Do you think the physical side of the game, in terms of the rough and tumble?
That's what I mean, like the shoulder to shoulder stuff. The actual like strength on strength stuff isn't as much there. I think if you look at Max Dowman, for example, I know it was a brief cameo.
He dived.
Sure, yeah.
He did.
But there was how many? Like he probably
that's not happening in the 1990s, is it?
Yeah, but what contact he's gaining is from like quick shifts when he's close to a player. He's not necessarily in the centre of midfield jostling with someone. And I suppose that's where you see the difference, actually, because if you look at the list of players, those players that have come through are primarily wide players, with the exception of Harvey Elliott, who when he came on was actually primarily playing on the right.
Yep.
In terms of like a out and out winger sort of thing, I think that's certainly how I feel it's going. But it definitely is getting younger because I think the sport is played a bit differently.
But yeah, I think you're right to say that. I think there's other reasons as well. I think that, and I'm going to
hurry up because I want to do E-triple-P in a minute.
Well, that's what I was going to mention.
Oh, right, okay,
The
yeah.
E-triple-P is a huge
Which is relating
reason.
to, look, I think the signings, sorry, very quickly, I think the signings part of this question is irrelevant to the actual it getting younger. Players, teams signing younger players they're not signing them because they're necessarily going to play them.
Yeah, they're hoarding young players. Yeah. That's where E-triple-P comes in. Clubs are hoarding young players, and it is almost like, being an irresponsible fisherman. You know what I mean? You're just hoarding, get the nets in, and then and we'll get them all in, and then if they're not suitable, we'll chuck them away or send them on.
Chuck them back when they're rotten.
Yeah, do you know what I mean?
No one can eat them.
You've gone too far with that analogy, I feel. But I think that's a huge reason as well. And that's why we're mentioning Premier League clubs, because they're pinching a lot of youngsters from all over the place.
Well, they're just their catchment area is now country worldwide or whatever. And the simple maths are that only 20 of the professional clubs in England are Premier League clubs.
Yep.
And it's absolutely viable and feasible that before E-triple-P, just on the law of averages, 72 clubs is much more likely to have a younger player than a Premier League
and
club.
The financial disparities are more stark than ever with the Premier League. So you can offer youngsters or clubs if they have. Again, it's happened to Fulham. You mentioned Harvey Elliott there. You can come along, and go, fine, he's a few million, sod off. We'll have him, whatever. You see that. You see that the big clubs just get bigger and better. I mean, how many sides can win the Champions League realistically before the ball is kicked in that tournament? People would probably have 4 teams at most as favourites. Years ago, you might have 7 or 8, something like that. So those are reasons as well. There's also a tactical reason why people are signing younger players, and much has been made of this in the last few years. And the Pep school of thought, even the Jurgen Klopp school of thought, whatever, pressing is such an important thing in football. And if you're going to press, you want to do it as long as possible in a game of football. How are you going to do that? You need as much energy as possible. You're not going to get that with 33, 34-year-olds.
But I don't think a 15-year-old's energy is going to be as good as an 18, 19-year-old, though.
No, they're not. But younger doesn't necessarily mean teenagers per se. You see the likes of Real Madrid and so on signing players for huge amounts of money when they're in their early 20s. We used to think a footballer would be at his peak in his late 20s.
Yeah.
I don't think you think that anymore.
I think it's probably mid-20s now.
You could say mid-20s. So therefore, what do you want to do? Well, you don't want to wait till that perceived peak when they're in the mid-20s. You get them. You're signing potential way more now than ever before. And because, again, a handful of clubs, PSG, Real Madrid, because Real Madrid doesn't matter what they do with their finances, they manage to find money from somewhere, and your big Premier League clubs, you've got the cash because they're the ones that compete in the latter stages of the Champions League. The Premier League is a wealthy beast. Real Madrid have cut their deal in La Liga. Who is going to challenge PSG in France, etc., etc.? You see that hoarding for all different reasons, but you see that, again, from a tactical point of view, get that potential in. You school them and you teach them, and as Vish is right, the game is played differently. Coaching comes into it as well, particularly in this country. We've seen a lot of change in the last 20 years. I think these are reasons why, because you want guys in their early mid-20s pressing for most of the game. They're going to be playing, 50-plus games a season, and you need a big squad. The increase in substitutions and all that kind of stuff.
There's also no restrictions on the younger players under a certain age as well.
There you go, yeah.
But can I just, I just want to deviate slightly from this talking point and just go back to Dowman and Ungamoa, particularly because, particularly with Dowman, when I watched it, I've watched him a few times through highlight clips and through the fact that loads of Arsenal fans have been really excited about him, and his name's been out there for ages as being, essentially like the new Saka or the new Wilshere or whatever. I know they're different players, but that kind of profile.
Yeah.
And the one thing I was really stunned by is actually how technically good he is for the age he is, because I think sometimes when you watch football, the age is just a number. And we have a vague understanding that when a player gets to 35 or whatever, you start to think that means a certain thing. We know footballers themselves can be very self-conscious about turning 30 and what that represents. But it is worth remembering that, a 15-year-old being that good technically and having that presence of mind to be able to do this, same with Ungamoa as well, the way he scores and the winner against Newcastle and stuff, they're outliers, right? They are outliers. We're having this conversation here about football getting younger, and maybe it is. I listed a couple of stats at the top of this discussion that may or may not be indicative. But it is worth remembering that for every Dowman and Ungamoa, there's been a Rooney, there's been an Owen, there's been a Milner, there's been a James Vaughan. There's always been players that peak very, very young and come onto the scene very, very early. And you go back even further than that, Daddy Kadamata, we talked about his son yesterday on the show. He was the same for Everton as a striker. He came in very young and scored a couple of notable goals. This stuff does happen.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean anything more broad than that. It just means that sometimes you get outliers in a bank of data. If you look at that, Sky Sports did a graphic off the back of the weekend's football on Monday on Sky Sports News of a big infographic of the average age of the players. And each player in the Premier League this season so far represented a dot, and it plotted out a graph. On that graph, you could see how much of an outlier they are. I mean, the vast majority of players operating in the Premier League at the moment look to me from that graphic, and I can't find it annoyingly, but it was about 25, 26, which basically lends itself to what you were saying about the average age. Yes, it's come down a bit.
So therefore it is getting younger, but maybe not to the extremes.
Absolutely, let's get it in perspective. There's absolutely zero chance whatsoever that any Premier League team in an important game or any Premier League game are going to be fielding 8 or 9 fucking 17-year-olds. It's not going to happen. There's loads of obvious reasons for that. So the final thing I'll say, just very quickly in case it's helpful, is I was reading about this coincidentally a couple of years ago, a really interesting data-led deep dive piece, long read, about American Olympic sprinters. And what they found was that the point of the article was it's very difficult to know why this is happening. They suspect it might be happening because of unseen, unknown effects, long-term effects of performance-enhancing drug substance use, right? Because Justin Gatlin was breaking all these records, running the fastest ever run at the age of 34 or whatever. But broadly speaking, what they found, which I found really interesting, and it may not lend itself to football, but I think it's just an interesting kind of talking point, is that in the early 80s, successful American sprinters were very, very young. They were like early 20s, right? Then through the mid-90s, the average age of them got up to be about 29 years old. Then it came way down again in the 2000s, and now it's going up again. So it may well be that it's more of a cyclical thing because we start to favour fast, energetic, young legs, but then there's a reaction against that, and we start playing more cerebral style, and we favour experience.
I
and
think
then
you're
it goes
right.
Back again. It might just be a bit more cyclical.
But I think that's a fair point. I think you're right. It's do you trust youngsters? Do you trust the 16 or 17-year-old? And then you got some very notable examples. Well, everyone else is doing it. You think, well, the attitudes change.
I just think, as I said at the top of this, of the 10 youngest Premier League starting 11s, there's only 20% that are in the last couple of years. And that says to me, you get 1 or 2 players dropped in there who are outliers. The overall trend is you need a balance, you need a mix.
To answer the question, I think we're all thinking that football is generally getting a little bit younger, but not to maybe the extremes of, as you say, you've got 3 15-year-olds in your starting 11 or anything like that.
Yeah, I don't think we'll ever get to that stage.
Yeah.
I think, Luke's right to point them out as outliers because ultimately it's never going to happen. You're never going to get fucking Bugsy Malone out there in the Premier League.
That
game.
would be good though.
Yeah.
I'd be up for that for a end of season special or something.
I'd say so. Little question here from James on email. If Jack Grealish can repeat the sort of form we saw against Brighton, would you take him to the World Cup at the end of the season?
James on email, Marcus on email.
Or is his time in an England shirt over? Go on, Vish.
I don't think it's ever over. I think
it is sometimes.
I was going to say,
yeah, but especially for his position out
James.
wide on the left. But at the same time, if you think of what's probably skewered him is the use of Eberechi Eze for England out there, and then also the emergence of Anthony Gordon. Barring, say, like Marcus Rashford really knocking him down by having a great season at Barcelona, I can't... he might be an alternate, but I don't see why you'd bring him along as a squad player because he's certainly not a starter.
Can I make a prediction?
Please.
I think that... Jack Grealish is 30 this season. I think he's 30 next month, September. Which is no age really, despite the conversation we've just had. So I don't think that's a problem. My prediction is he is going to have a massive season at Everton.
I think so.
I think it's set up for him there.
Yep.
I think that we'll see a big clamour for him to be included. Certain amount of these predictions are governed by things like injury and luck and all the rest of it. But if it goes as it could go, as he'll hope and it'll go, I think he'll be front of mind in a big way just because of the type of character he is, the reputation he's got, the things he's achieved before. And I think he's going to give Thomas Tuchel a really big decision to make. In a weird way, the same way that Southgate had to make a decision on him for the last tournament.
Yeah.
And obviously it went a certain way.
Well, he played his way out of the squad, you might say.
But I think...
Or injured his way out of it.
I think it also depends on the manager. We're talking about England specifically here.
Yeah.
Southgate, the thing is, I think Southgate potentially wanted a reason to not pick him, and he got more than one reason not to pick him, and he didn't pick him. I think if Tuchel likes him, I think he's going to have to make a big decision because I think there'll be a big media clamour for him to be included if it goes the way I think it will go for Everton.
I think you're right.
I think Tuchel is a massive fan of his, we should say.
Well,
that.
I think he offers England something a bit different from Eze, who, let's be honest, if Eze hits the ground running at Arsenal, has a great season, you might think he's a starter for England. I don't think Anthony Gordon's quite done it, really, in an England shirt. I'm not
talking as a starter. You're talking about a squad.
Yeah.
If you need someone to rearrange Virgil van Dijk's calf muscle, he's the best man for it.
That is true.
That's what I'm saying. Eze can do what Grealish can do.
Yeah, but true. But you don't need to worry about Van Dijk's calves if Grealish there. Bring her own calves. So I think there's definitely a chance that he could go to the World Cup having a good season. So yeah, I mean,
Vish, you're right. Vish is right to say. I mean, Eze. You look at Eze. The thing about Eze is that he's not been the victim of having to almost at least go halfway and meet the manager and be an assistant player, right? The thing about Grealish is, in some ways, he's like his own worst enemy. We don't know how much of this is because Guardiola's making him do certain things, recycling possession, stuff like that. But Grealish at his worst looks like a player who wants to completely absolve himself of responsibility to make things happen. He can't go into Everton.
I don't think he won't do
and
that.
And the early
this season.
signs are he's not done that yet. He's actually made a big difference.
Also, again, I go back to the summer in 2024 when a lot of the players were saying to Southgate, well, why have you dropped him? We like having him around and we like having him on the pitch. So Tuchel will talk to the likes of Harry Kane. He will talk to some of his more senior players and he'll get a very good write-up. But time will tell, everybody.
The great thing is, by the way, just before you cut to break, the great thing is there's a great competition of places, right? The thing is we're not relying on them. The conversation before this, years ago, would be, we just need Grealish to find some more form because we've got no one else.
Yeah.
And we'd be desperate for him to get into form, not are we going to take him or not because of all the other options we've got. So it's a nice problem to have, actually.
That left side in that attack for England is ultimately up for grabs.
Do you know who... by all accounts, who has been impressing Thomas Tuchel despite the results of his club?
Jared Bowen?
Mason Mount.
Mount.
Managers love Mount. Managers love him.
Remember him?
Do you know what? That's a chat for another day.
Do you know what? He's from my hometown and that's depressed me.
Oh, yeah. It was on my radar, as of course it would be. All right, back in a sec.
We've got an email from Dom. Which Premier League stadium gives their team the biggest home advantage?
Craven Cottage.
Next question from Neil.
The new Big Dick Stadium for the Toffees.
We've got to stick with that. We have to stick with
that.
that.
The new Big Dick Stadium for the Toffees seemed loud and intimidating on first impression, but which grounds are the most and least intimidating?
Yeah.
I'm pleased Pete's not on the show today because a lot of people have been pissed off with him bigging up the Mackhams. I saw something on, someone shared something with me yesterday online because I think Sunderland just lost in the League Cup, right?
Yes, yeah.
And there were people online still taking issue with what Pete said 2 weeks ago, pointing out the empty seats in the League Cup game at Sunderland. Oh, where's your great fans now, then, eh? So I'm pleased Pete's not on the show today for this. But it's a good question.
Well, I think when St James's Park wants to be, that's a very intimidating place. Mark Gay mentioned that before, and you saw that against Liverpool, how everyone was fully up for that. You're duty bound to mention Anfield. I think Leeds are going to really need Ellen Road. You know, as Gary Neville was caught on a hot mic saying there that the one group of supporters I wouldn't want to go near. So we know that can be...
But I think he's got his own reasons for that, hasn't he?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But they're a raucous bunch, is what I would say.
Ellen Road's a good shout because you speak to any Leeds fan and they will tell you that it is the most intimidating ground at its best and also at its worst.
Yeah, so this is absolutely right.
I find that it's not going to win me any friends, but I find the Anfield thing a bit overrated.
I think that's probably because it saves itself for big European nights or big games, which is why I said it in St James's Park. When it wants to be. You say, because there's a certain, maybe not so much St James's Park. I think with Anfield, it's like if Anfield are hosting, Burnley, it's not going to be that raucous, is it? Because they fully expect to win, and most likely will win.
There's a bit of chicken and egg here, isn't it? Because I think people go to Anfield wanting to be a part of that atmosphere.
Yeah.
And at times you're almost seeing from a hymn sheet, but then doing so you get moments like the Bournemouth game at the end where people are thrilled to be part of an exciting Anfield night, and that adds to it without necessarily being as authentic as it used to be. But then who are we to judge that authenticity?
Well, I mean,
people get gatekeeper about that kind of stuff.
But I mean, it's why in that.
But also, it's a big thing because the atmosphere was amazing at the end of that Bournemouth.
It was,
game.
and it's there's a reason why Mikel Arteta, did that thing where he tried to pump the atmosphere into the training ground when Arsenal played. He talked about it being an intimidating place, so it can be. So, I think,
The ironic answer here, by the way, and the true answer, as far as I'm concerned, was Goodison Park. I mean that's the key part of the question
for both home and away teams.
But it's really fine. But I can't remember how many times I've interviewed a player or seen a player interviewed. I even interviewed Howard Webb once, right? Remember? And he said he used to fucking drag gun at Goodison Park.
Well,
it's a fucking bear pit.
If we're talking about previous stadiums, and I'm so sorry,
which is why it was so important. Everton did what they did in the first game. Against Brighton, they made a real effort to do something that maybe West Ham perhaps didn't do.
Well, you
were
mentioned
about to say Upton Park.
I was.
Yeah.
Upton Park, man. I only went there once, maybe twice. Bloody hellfire! Like it was proper, and it's such a shame.
Which links us neatly to the worst atmosphere in the league ground.
But I do think that you've got Ellen Road's good. I've been there. It was pretty full on. Crystal Palace are really good for the relative size.
Would you say, I mean, I don't know if you didn't necessarily have to use the word intimidating, but who's going to encourage their team more and suck the ball into the goal, that kind of 12-man business?
So I've actually...
The question's about giving their team the biggest home advantage.
Yes.
So I've gone to Palace away quite a few times before they came into the Premier League. And I found their atmosphere and experience without necessarily being intimidating.
Yes.
And it might have been down to the fact that I wasn't necessarily supporting the team that I was there watching in the away end. But it's really impressive, and it's very much focused on their own team rather than cultivating an atmosphere that away players would or away teams would dread.
Yeah. I mean, he asked about least intimidating. I think people probably have Craven Cottage up there. Because most of the noise comes.
You say that, but like the end of that Manchester United game last weekend.
Yeah, I mean,
when there's a whip of we're on top here.
Yes,
it sounds like any other ground. I know, the thing to say is look at them with their fucking Victoria sponge. But
I really like Victoria.
I was going to say,
so do I.
Yeah,
it's good cake.
I think if I may be diplomatic, I would say we've had a really good start to the Premier League season this season in terms of atmosphere, which of course has been informed by the televised games we've been able to watch, because you're right about the Bournemouth game at Anfield. That was much closer than people thought it would be. Liverpool players and needed the fans on that occasion, like you say, particularly towards the end. I think Leeds with stuff like Sunderland and Leeds, both winning on their opening day. There's an element there where that both those clubs have a really good support anyway, and they're so pleased to be back in the Premier League that I know the Sunderland game wasn't televised, but you could see it, and that played into it. And then last weekend we had incredible scenes at West Ham, perhaps for all the wrong reasons, but the atmosphere was full on for very, very different reasons until everyone left. But that's fans having an effect. I mean, it's and then the Newcastle Liverpool game was extraordinary. Like, it's an amazing atmosphere there. Whenever I've been to St James's Park for a European night, Marcus, you were with me. That was an amazing atmosphere.
Yeah.
But I know that's an outlier again because it's their first home game back in Europe for a long old time. But even so, I mean, I think we're actually quite blessed in the Premier League, despite all its attempts to self-sanitize and to make itself overtly commercial and
ticket prices
to export it and to fuck people over. Despite all that, we still are quite well treated with great atmospheres at great stadiums. And I think they've fallen on tough times at the moment.
Credit to the fans for
but
that.
Old Trafford on its day is amazing as well. It is. Like, I mean, it's not been recent, but it is on its day.
And Man United fans are one of maybe only 2 or 3 sets of supporters that visit Craven Cottage and don't have a go at the home fans. And I thank them for that.
Yeah. We could do a whole other conversation about travelling fans, because Man United fans travel amazingly.
They do. Yeah. They're very raucous, I have to say. Too raucous, one might say.
All right, should we finish with this one then from Neil?
Go on then.
On Blue Sky. People still using Blue Sky, amazing.
Love that.
With Premier League managers rekindling their love
Get
for a
back
long
to X.
with Premier League managers rekindling their love for a long throw. I love a long throw.
Oh, we do.
What's the next thing you'd like to see make a comeback in football? Now, before we move on for that, there we go.
Yeah.
Back to old Grimsby John, whatever his name was.
Dr. John.
Disrespectful to him in 96.
Yeah.
Happy birthday, by the way.
99 now. He's been wished happy birthday so many times. The thing I love about a long throw is the thing I always come back to, which is the fact that there's so much about football that you still can't control. And a long throw done correctly. Livramento does a good one, by the way. Strikes fear in the heart of, specifically out here by India, but a lot of players, because it's hard to defend against.
What do you want to bring back, Vish?
Or
would you like to see make a comeback?
The back pass rule. Get rid of that. Get people knocking it about and giving it back to the keeper.
There we are. Liverpool have won the league again. Oh, hey, there's an old reference.
It's a sick burn.
Yeah. What do I want being brought back?
You'd like to make a comeback, slightly.
Like a shift. 2 up front.
I was going to say that.
But teams do that now.
No.
Not the same.
No.
Not the same.
2 up front.
Yeah.
Do not leave the width of the penalty area. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Yeah, that's it. There's something to be said, though. If you could do that, the reason why 4-3-3 kind of came in was because it was seen as a superior formation, in that if you match players up and blah, 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 I don't get too beardy about
it's
it.
a bit continental, though, and therefore untrustworthy.
But do you remember how that started? Because it was 2 up front, and 2 players you would describe as centre forwards.
Yes.
And then second striker, support striker came into the lexicon as the second striker, quote
playing
unquote,
between the lines and
play
all
a bit
that.
deeper.
You're blaming Teddy Sheringham for that, are you?
Well, no, it wouldn't necessarily be a number 10 or a drop-off striker. It was just be a support striker. And the bridge between that and the attacking midfielder was basically what Lampard did. So Mourinho
both of them, you mean?
Yeah. So Mourinho talked about, like, one of the best things he did was with his defensive midfielder, whether it was Makelele or Essien eventually, was that Thiago role. Because it was like, found someone to do both jobs there.
Yeah.
It's a really good point. I never considered that.
It is, yeah. Also as well, when Barcelona became like the centre of football under Pep, it was the 4-3-3, and I think a lot of people kind of copied that, although it was, again, I'm talking about in this country. I think people talk about it, more balanced across the field and all that kind of stuff. But then, as we know, tactics are, they go in and out of fashion. Now, I'm not saying the 2-3-5 is going to make a return, although, we have seen Pep do something too similar. So, and I know, again, that nowadays the idea of you start with a formation, you play the whole game with that formation, and you end with that formation, that's kind of old-fashioned thinking as well. But what I would say with the 2 up front, and I know Simeone's done a little bit of Atletico and so on, defenders are drilled now, when they grow up, there's 2 centre-halves, really. I know back 3 is there, but 2 centre-halves. you're really looking after one bloke and you're maybe helping your fullback out. Well, just chuck another man up there, one-on-one. Do you know what I mean? There are things.
I think it's exactly that. I think a lot of the...
They're not used to it. People wouldn't be used to that. And I'm not, this is not some cheat code. I'm just saying that, again, in certain in-game tactics, you see a little bit of that. But a proper... I think strike partnership is what we're after, Vish.
I was speaking to a mate of mine who plays semi-professional football, and he's a defensive midfielder, and he said one of the things that annoys him most is when he gets a call from his centre-back to ask to help out, and he's like, there's two of you there.
Yeah.
And one of you's not doing anything.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Like, three against one.
It's like, do some work. I'm doing some work over here.
Yeah. Everything's linked to everything else, though, because the reason that centre-backs have to do more in a different way is because full-backs are so much more attacking now. So your full-back is a completely different role. It's funny you said two up front, because my answer to the question when I was thinking about it would have been related to it, which is that I feel like we're missing out a lot on the fact that we don't really have any flying, hit the byline wingers anymore. Like something was lost when wingers became wide forwards and they started to take an interest in being in the middle of the pitch and trying to score rather than whipping balls in over and over again, unless you're obviously David Moyes for Man United, that very specific game that time, which was funny.
I was going to say, I mean, Fulham love to cross the ball under Silva.
I'm not talking about that, though. I'm not talking about not crossing the ball. I'm talking about players whose specific role was to beat their fullback and cross it.
Do you know there's one player who's been doing it in the league consistently since basically as long as he's been in the league, and because of that, he's in a weird space where I don't think certain other teams trust him to sign. That's Dwight McNeil.
Right.
Dwight McNeil constantly plays on the left as a left footer, and his job is to basically beat the fullback or cross just in front of the fullback.
Well, you saw it at Fulham Man United on the weekend. You had Ryan Sessegnon up against Amad Diallo. And they were both, and so they are going to provide that. I mean, I was thinking about this the other day about the inverted wingers and so on. You wouldn't even bother calling them inverted wingers anymore. That's a very old-fashioned kind of language now. But the reason why is, look at Jared Bowen when he whips the balls in for Wolves against for West Ham against Wolves, and Paqueta gets on the end of it, and you see Salah doing this. Just because you're, as I say, what we used to call inverted wingers, I think you understand the point I'm saying there.
But Jared Bowen,
you can still put crosses in. You can pop them in right in the danger area, so you're not losing the crossing.
No,
you can cut in and shoot. It just gives more of an option.
But that's not what I'm saying. I get all that.
But you can still hit the byline. So look at Grealish. Look at that first goal for Everton in the Big Dick Stadium.
Yeah.
You know, goes down the byline and whips it in, and it's glorious stuff. And that's what you need to train wingers on. Essentially, use your other foot, because you also then got the option to cut inside. I mean, when Blackburn won the league under Kenny Dalglish, you had Ripley and Wilcox in a four across the pitch and whipping the balls into Sutton and Shearer.
Yeah.
My goodness, glory days.
That's the other thing. But it's lower percentage now, because why? You only have one striker.
Exactly, yeah. Indeed. But what I was going to make is that Dalglish said, I think teams are figuring us out. Was that, well, because you hit the byline and then cross it and they head it in, we're going to have to mix it up a bit. And he said to Ripley, well, when you get the ball, don't always hit the byline, maybe cut inside. And apparently Ripley went, well, then what do I do?
You see, John Terry's really, I know we've got to wrap up, but just very briefly, John Terry's actually very interesting on this. John Terry talks about the differences between when he was captaining that Mourinho side and 20 years ago and what it's like now. And he said, the playing out from the back stuff is this is not like a kind of weird Brexit point about how everyone wants to play these days, because obviously John Terry's played with all these different players and under all these different managers. The point he was just making was that people missed the point, or what I got from it was people missed the point about playing out from the back and not playing out from the back. What you're not understanding now is that John Terry says that when I watch a team now, I'm seeing players who aren't quite as trusted to make their own decisions as they were 20 years ago. Because when we played out from the back, we always wanted to split, and I like the ball at my feet, and I wanted to do that. He was
underrated two-footed player, Terry.
But he said sometimes there'd be three forwards waiting to press us, and if they did that, we would flip it. Yeah. We would get Peter Cech to put it up to Didier Drogba's chest, and then we'd beat that press, and then we'd mix it up. Yeah. The point isn't that you play out from the back or you don't. The point is that you make a decision you need to make based on the circumstances you find yourself in, definitely. And then you revert to what your tactics are. And I don't think there's as much of that goes on these days.
I think Pep's
and that informs a lot of this discussion.
But yeah, I think every team ultimately needs a Didier Drogba chest.
Oh, yeah. What a chest it is.
Oh, my goodness.